Hello, this is Riley Hammond. Just recording a quick demonstration of my final project for Advanced Programming. Honestly, I think the best way to start is just by running it and maybe explaining what you see later. So, you can see it opens on an instruction screen. To give you the summary, this is a simplified version of the card game Hearts, if you're familiar with it. Otherwise, so basically the first person on any given turn can play any card they like that's not a heart. I'll get back to that. Based on this is how the other players decide what they can play. Now let's say the first player plays a spade. If you then have a spade in your hand, you're forced to play one of your spades. Otherwise, if you don't have a spade, you can play any card. This is where we get back to hearts. If you choose to respond to that spade and don't have any spades with a heart, then that's what's called breaking hearts, which means the next first player can choose to play a heart. At the end of each round, when all four players have placed their cards down, the one with the highest face value matching the original suit will be the loser card, and then whoever played that card that lost will have all four played cards collected and entered into the bottom of their deck, which will be counted up at the very end of the game. When those are counted up at the very end of the game, hearts will count as 1, while the queen of spades is 13. So just press S to start. You can see the cards lined up on the right side here, as well as displayed on the bottom. Hearts are grayed out because they're not valid, at least not to play right this second. So begin. Now what begin did was it handled every computer turn that happened before mine while leaving my card and the player after me as the default. So this is an error where it decided to base it off of player 4, but just to continue, let's say I select the 2 of spades and continue. So you can see it displayed my card and the card after me. Then I just have to start over. You can see it reblanked itself, removed the card from the list here, and it removed a card here. Then if it begins, you can see that it started over again, so I just have to select a diamond in this case and hit continue. Now, you'll probably notice that it does have some logic errors. You'll probably see why later. But I guess just to start, basically the fundamental of what's happening under the hood, I'm sorry, for a second. Okay, sorry, had recording issues earlier, so I wanted to double check. There's a status, the underlying controller, I guess you could call it, is an enumerated type called status. Intro is just like the instruction screen. Scorecard will be what's displayed at the end, or there's a dev tool where you can press Z to see it, where it'll add up like the total score for each player. And then start, input, and over basically represents the 3 phases of the gameplay as represented by the 3 different buttons you saw. Graphics has like a variety of methods provided by Professor Dion, like init, initgl, timer, cursor, basically to track the overall game state and control the window. While I implemented a variety like init turn, good chunks of draw, init start screen, and handle turn, where the majority of the logic happens. So when it's time to display, it'll just check what the current state is. If it's just intro, it'll display the intro screen. Scorecard, it'll display the scorecard. But then start, input, and over is where it gets interesting. Start will initialize the game screen with 4 blank cards, as well as the player's deck and all the usable keys. Then pressing start will do the first half of handle turn here, where it finds the turn order and clears out a vector to represent all the cards used in this current turn. Then based on that turn order, it'll handle basically all the turns that happen before player input is required. So let's say that player 2 goes first, it'll do player 2, 3, and 4, then return, and essentially wait for player input. It'll then switch to the game state input and wait for a key to be entered in the keyboard, and if the player selects a valid card while the game state is in input from the player hitting start switches it over to input, then it'll select that card, kick it back down to the buttons, where it'll then switch it into game state over and handle the back half of handle turn. So when it calls handle turn again, but this time with game state input, it'll do any remaining turns after the player input is done, as well as figure out who lost and act accordingly. Handle player turn is basically to get the key the player pressed, handle auto turn, randomly selects a valid card, find turn order, and find loser, do what they sound like they do, basically. A lot of the way it achieves these things is by using card and deck. Card is what it sounds like, represents a card. It has an enumerated type called suit that will can be the 4 suits or any to basically represent a blank card. It has multiple constructors based on a default value or past values. You can make a copy of a card, check if it's playable, a variety of getters, and there's a 2-string representation. Deck, conceptually, is kind of like a container for a queue of cards. There's also an enumerated type to help with one of the constructors. This constructor, you can pass the enumerated type empty or full to make either an empty deck or a full deck of 52 cards, or alternatively, you can just pass it a vector of cards to make one of a predetermined size. You can split the deck in half, shuffle it, sort it, find a card in it, check if the deck is empty, check if the deck contains a card with a given suit. You can get a list of whether the cards are playable in the form of a vector of booleans. You can add a card, remove a card, pull a card off the front, get the size of the deck, get the front card of the deck, get a vector representation, or calculate the points at the end. I also have a second executable, test.cpp, which is mainly to test the methods of card and deck I just mentioned. So you can see it does not print any of the error messages I've created here, which means everything's working at the moment. Button is just another thing created by Professor Diane, as was circle, quad, and shape. And then spade, and the other suits were made by me, just to quickly show off what those look like. You have the ints x and y representing the center of where the suit will be drawn, as well as a draw method that basically just makes a compound shape out of circles, diamonds, and squares. This will then be used in the card draw method, which will basically call the different draw methods of these suits based on the enumerated type suit. And I guess just to go over the graphics one more time, it'll flow from intro and then repeatedly through start, input, and over based on user input before eventually hitting scorecard either when it runs out of cards or when you use the dev tool of pressing Z. That's the basic functionality. Thank you.